We are recording. Once again, welcome everyone. As I was saying, we're going to get used to using that chat function. Go ahead and do that. I want to officially welcome you to our Mursion Future of Work virtual roundtable series. Super excited that once again, we have Jason Rosoff from Radical Candor, who is going to be with us discussing practicing radical candor in VR. We're just going to say a quick hello. I'll let you know the names behind the faces you're seeing on the panelist side. Brent's going to give a brief overview of Mursion. Jason will lead our discussion of Radical Candor. You actually get to see one of our VR simulations live and in practice. We'll leave plenty of time for question and answers. And we do call these roundtables, not webinars, because we want your input. We want you to ask questions. We want you to make comments. We want you to share your thoughts and ideas. And that's what we're going to use that chat function for. So don't be shy. Go ahead. Even throughout the presentation, we'll try to keep tabs on that and answer any questions as we go along or save them for the end, whatever is appropriate with that. My name is Jamie Thomason. I am a simulation specialist, which is something Brent will explain a little bit more about later, and a learning partner here at Mursion. And speaking of, I have my very own VP of Sales and our Director of Business Strategy, Mr. Brentt Brown, and I'm super pleased. So for those of you that join us on a regular basis, first off, welcome back. You know we love having you here, but you're probably happy because you get to hear somebody else say what we do and how we do it. Little different words. It's always great to hear another perspective. And for those of you who are brand new to us, we're just going to give you a quick overview so that you know a little bit about us and how we work. And then we're going to turn things over to Jason. Now, I'm not going to read Jason's bio to you, but I am going to send this deck out afterwards. So you will have this available to you so you can get to know Jason a little bit better, along with his LinkedIn Connect and our LinkedIn Connect, so that you can make sure that we follow up and keep that conversation going when we're done. But right now, I'm going to turn things over to Brent.
Good morning, everybody. And coming in from a very apocalyptic San Francisco, it feels like there's an eclipse out there due to the fog plus fire situation we have going. But we at Mursion recreate the most challenging situations that people face in their day-to-day jobs, and we give them a psychologically safe place to practice and master humans, what some people call soft skills, we call human skills. So we do a wide variety of things today. Today we're going to be talking about giving feedback, but we also do simulations for leaders to practice how to be inclusive, or salespeople to practice how to do good discovery calls, or customer service folks on how to de-escalate angry customers. Basically, any challenging situations that people face in their day-to-day jobs, we can recreate those situations and give people a safe place to practice those skills. So how does Mursion fit into a learning leader's toolkit, or better still, how does it fit into a learning leader's journey? Next slide. We believe that in order for learners to benefit from immersive practice, they need to first know what a best practice is. So that's why we're so excited about this partnership with Radical Candor, because we really focus on being best in the world at delivering immersive simulations. But learners need to first know what the best practices are. So they typically will go to an ILT, which we're not doing too much of anymore, or VLT, and e-learning, books, videos. They need to know and experience what good looks like, and then they come to Mursion in order to practice that and to get ongoing space learning opportunities to apply what they're doing, and to reflect upon what they do and how they perform these human behaviors in combination with their real jobs. So that's really the value proposition that Mursion offers, is whatever training initiative you have, we can come in and really provide that safe practice environment. And it's also why it's so important for us to have partners like Radical Candor, who have really great frameworks for how to have these difficult conversations. And we offer this platform for that, to hardwire those skills into daily behaviors. So I just really quickly wanted to describe how does Mursion really scale or address these human behavior changes at scale. I think this is what sets us apart from a lot of other simulation or VR companies that are out there, is that fundamentally we believe that we are in the business of human behavior transformation. And technology can help us really scale that, but that technology really needs to have the human touch, the human element. If you want learners to feel safe, if you want them to feel like they can really put themselves out there, they need to be practicing with a technology that really does feel human. And we don't believe that AI can really achieve this yet. It's not fully conversational. So we use real humans, live trainers that are on the back end of our technology. So a learner will schedule a simulation in a synchronous fashion, but it's quite on demand. We can do some of our projects we're doing even 24 hours in advance. They come into a virtual environment where they practice their craft with avatars, but a single simulation specialist or trainer on the back end is driving the conversation. So the content of the conversation is really driven by the human, but all the animations of the avatars are driven by AI, and increasingly we're leveraging AI to provide automated analytics for learners on their performance. So that's just a little bit about Mursion. Really excited to have Jason with us today to talk about how we're taking this technology and pairing it with world-class content about how to give candid and empathetic feedback.
Yeah, Brent, excited to be here. I hope everyone can hear me and see me relatively clearly this morning, despite the darkness in the background. I don't know if y'all can see it, but the outside my office window there, that is the actual color of the sky in California right now, is this burnt orange color, which thematically goes with the Radical Candor brand. So I'm happy Mother Nature phoned that one in for me. So to get us started this morning, I just want to share with you all a little bit about what Radical Candor is and how we see the process by which we think about organizations rolling Radical Candor into their leadership attributes and training, as well as the culture of their organization. Because we, like Brent, think of ourselves as being in the same business. One of the reasons why we enjoy this partnership is that our goal ultimately is behavior change. And we understand that in order for behavior change to happen, not only do people need to understand the framework, but they need to understand the personal relevance of it. And I think we, over the course of our training, do help people to establish that. But let's talk about the framework for a couple of minutes, and then how we think about rolling it out. And then we'll get into a demo. And then finally, we'll have plenty of time for your questions. So Radical Candor, I like to say, is simple but not easy. It's an idea that when applied, we've seen both firsthand, meaning as practitioners of Radical Candor ourselves, as well as through the work with other companies, can help people build stronger relationships and just do better work collaboratively. But to help you understand what Radical Candor is, I think it's really helpful to share a story. So I want to tell you really quickly about a time relatively early on in my career, maybe 8 or 10 years ago now, when I had to pitch the board of Khan Academy, which is the organization I was a part of before this. If y'all have kids, you probably are quite familiar with Khan Academy now during the pandemic, because it is being used by schools around the country as a way to help provide students with access to high quality materials, even when they're away from the classroom. We had to pitch our board because we wanted to take on an entirely new line of business. We wanted to make Khan Academy work for teachers as well as for students. Originally, it was designed as a direct-to-consumer, sort of direct-to-student product. And we'd gone through a bunch of iterations to build out products, prototypes of products to test with teachers. Ultimately, we landed on something super exciting, but what we realized was that this wasn't just like new features turned on. Teachers and students had very different needs. This is really a huge strategic shift. So we went into this conversation, and even though I was the chief product officer at the time, I had done most of the work leading the product. I was very nervous about presenting that work in front of that senior audience. And so I've been working in collaboration with some other folks on my team, specifically a person in marketing who was like, we've been working super closely. I feel really comfortable presenting it. I'm happy to take that off your plate. And I was super grateful to them for doing it. And as we got in there, I became even more grateful, because as soon as they got started, I realized like this was a real skill that they had and something that I could learn from. And I knew that I really only had one job to do, which is just be supportive in this conversation, to demonstrate to the board how invested I was in actually building out this product solution. And the reaction that we got from the board was great. So lots of interest, lots of really great questions. And I left to that meeting feeling like we had just done something really good, both for the work that we cared about, but also for these teachers who we had grown to deeply appreciate and understand their challenges. And we really wanted to help them in some way. And so I walked out to the lunch table, and Dana, who is the person marketing who took that presentation, came and tapped me on the shoulder. And she was like, you know what, I just wanted to check in and see how you thought that presentation went. And I actually thought it was a weird question because it seemed so positive to me. So I shared my perspective, and I noticed as I said some positive things about it, like Dana started to relax, which I thought was super odd. And then she said something that made things make sense. She said, you know, I'm so glad to hear you say that, Jason, because I looked over at you a few times during the conversation, and honestly, you look pissed off. I thought I was like completely screwing it up. And I noticed other people reacting to you looking pissed off. And I'm worried that that might have undermined some of the support that you were trying to show during that discussion. And it was weird because like I was so invested in this being a success that it was sort of a shock to hear that I had done something that might have undermined it. And I remember like my mind and sort of somatically, like what was going on in my body, it was like I was rejecting it at first. Like I was rejecting this feedback. But after a few minutes of reflection, I knew I would need to do. I just went back to my team and I asked them, I said, team, have you ever noticed like that sometimes, you know, my face and my words don't say the same thing? And they sort of laughed and they said, yeah, we call that your thinking face. And I was like, okay, so not only has this happened before, but it's happened enough times that my team has given it a name. And then I went to my boss, who's the CEO of Khan Academy. And I was like, you know, I wanted to check in and make sure that I was communicating clearly in there, that I'm very supportive of this. And he said, you know, honestly, we've been working together long enough that I can kind of read between the lines, but sometimes your body language and your verbal communication, they don't match up and it's sort of confusing. And then I did the thing that I think we all do when we get feedback that we don't necessarily like, which is I went home and complained about it to my wife. And she just sort of laughed at me and said, yeah, like, of course, this is a problem. Every time you do something that requires concentration, you look like you are angry. And so it was not really until that moment, so like 10 people giving me the same feedback over the course of the day, that I really fully appreciated how special what Dana did for me in this story actually, in this situation actually was, which was she combined two things which often happen independently of each other, but rarely happen together, which is she combined a care for me personally with a willingness to challenge me directly. And for me, the care personally came across in the non-judgmental way that she shared her perspective. She said, this is what I noticed and this is how it made me feel. But she wasn't so concerned about my short-term feelings that she was unclear with me. Because after years of reflecting on this and telling this story, what I realized is I've been receiving this feedback in various ways over the course of my career. And it was never clear enough to me like what was happening or what the impact was of what was happening so that I could actually understand it and change it. And so the clarity with which she communicated to me what the problem was so helpful. And I'm grateful to her to this day. Often one of the questions I get about this is like, so how do you fix it? Because a lot of other people suffer from the same affliction. And all I can say is that this allowed me to bring awareness to the issue, and awareness is the way that I manage it. I have not fixed it. This still happens occasionally, but I tell this story to my teams and even to like clients that I work with. And I found it really beneficial because they from time to time will notice that I have my thinking face, and instead of misinterpreting it to mean that I am annoyed, upset, angry, or otherwise bothered, they'll actually say, hey, like they'll ask the question, is that your thinking face? And what's important about radical candor, like I said, simple, not easy, is that this combination of caring personally and challenging directly works really well as a framework for thinking about how you can guide your communication with your coworkers or other people in your life to a better place. I want to go through these axes one at a time to kind of describe what it is that we're trying to get at with each of them. So first, the care personally axis. This is what we like to call the give a damn axis. Depending on what part of the country you're from, it might be give a darn axis. And the whole idea here is that we're going to get more out of our work and our working relationships if we actually care about the people that we work with. And this idea to a group of people who are invested in the idea of skills development through VR, especially human skill development through VR, is probably not doesn't feel revolutionary. But for a lot of people, I think they've been given a message about what it means to be professional. And for a lot of us, that means sort of leave your emotions and leave your humanity and all the things that make you the wonderful person that you are at home and come to work like some sort of a work producing robot. And I think that message affects the way that we show up. I'm actually listening to a memoir right now about this guy who's an entrepreneur and wound up having a psychotic break, in large part because he kept thinking that he had to be a certain way when he came to work, and that put him at a distance from almost all the other people that he worked with. And that isolation wound up being a contributing factor to his mental health. And so this is a real effect. We want to be, and we want to avoid this sort of trap. We want to find ways to be more than simply professional at work. We want to remember that relationships are really the currency by which great collaborative work gets done. And so we want to nurture and build those relationships. And so for us, moving up on care personally is really about recognizing the value, the humanity of the people around you, and honoring and respecting that, even when you have to have a conversation that might be uncomfortable or difficult. It'd be lovely to be able to sort of stop there and say, that's all you need. You just need to like care about each other and everything will be great. But we know that the truism of the road to hell being paved with good intentions. I think there's a lot of things that where we do really care about each other and we don't necessarily have the intent to harm, undermine, or otherwise get in the way of good work. But we do. And so we need to be able to talk about those things. And that's why we need this other dimension, the challenge directly dimension, which we lovingly call the willing to piss people off dimension. And we call it this for a very particular reason, which is often the thing that gets in the way of us challenging other people directly is that it's really uncomfortable. And so we don't have, because we're so unwilling, and this is like a positive adaptive trait for humanity. Like we're harmony seekers, like on average, human beings seek harmony. And that makes us unwilling to even take the chance of upsetting that harmony. But often leadership boils down to the willingness to take a small amount of social risk for the potential of a large amount of social gain. And for a lot of us, this is not something that starts when we're learning to be professional. This starts much earlier. This starts when we're learning to talk. Many of us have been given this message: if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And in addition to that, there's other social cues that we get throughout our lives. And these may vary by culture of origin. They may vary by regional culture, and they may vary by race, gender, and ethnicity. But there are lots of messages that the world sends to people that it's just not okay to say things that might upset the balance, might upset somebody else. But we need to be willing to do that if we're going to be effective. So that's what radical candor is, right? It's this combination of caring personally on the one hand and challenging directly on the other, and something that can help keep us motivated when we find ourselves worried about the sort of emotional investment of radical candor, is to think about what happens when we fail, when we're not radically candid, when we don't care, we don't challenge. When we challenge directly but we fail to care personally, we call that obnoxious aggression. This might also be called brutal honesty. This is probably the most common misconception about radical candor, is that they're equivalent, that obnoxious aggression and radical candor are equivalent. We also used to, in a very early version of the book, Kim called this the asshole quadrant. And she did that partly because it felt true, but also because she thought it would really help differentiate radical candor and obnoxious aggression. But what she realized when she did it was that the reaction that she got was exactly the opposite of what she hoped for. The reaction she got when she called it that was people started to write down the names of the folks that they thought belonged in that box. And what we've realized, and what psychology teaches us, is that the moment we start associating these behaviors with personality, the moment we attribute these behaviors with personality, we start to see them as fixed, as unchangeable. And that's exactly the opposite of what we want. We want to use this framework to describe behavior and to think about how we can change that behavior to get us to a better place. So if you find yourself over the course of this thinking, oh, I identify with that quadrant or that quadrant, that's good. And I want to encourage you to make a small mental shift, which is often my behavior falls into that quadrant. So next is where we fail on both dimensions. We fail to care or to challenge, and we call this manipulative insincerity. The extreme version of manipulative insincerity is backstabbing, is actively undermining someone else for our own gain or not. But a simple version of this that happens very often is the false apology, where you're in a disagreement with somebody else, but you're sort of out of steam for that day. And so you wind up saying something like, you know what, you're right, I'm wrong. Like, you just go ahead and do the thing that you said you wanted to do when you came in here. And what we need to recognize is that's neither helpful to that person, especially if you have information that tells you that they are in fact doing something that is incorrect or might be harmful, nor is it clear. The most common version of this, though, that appears in the workplace is talking about people instead of talking to them directly. And this is a thing, we have nice ways of saying this and not so nice ways of saying this, but the version that I hear all the time is water cooler chatter. This also appears in what many of us have experienced as the meeting after the meeting, where you get together to discuss all the things that happened in that meeting, but the person who most needs to hear it is never invited to that conversation. And we just want to recognize how unproductive those things are. Sometimes there's a minor value in being able to sort of process what it is that's going through our heads. But if that doesn't turn into positive action to try to resolve the situation, then we should recognize for what it is, which is at the very best, not helping, and in many cases actually hurting relationships and our ability to get work done. Then last but not least, we have the quadrant where most people make their most regrettable mistakes, which is where we do care very deeply, but we fail to challenge directly. We call that ruinous empathy. And the whole idea of ruinous empathy is when our concern for the other person paralyzes us. It causes us to be really unclear or not to act on their behalf. And a way to think about this is just thinking, is to think about the difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is really about feeling and experiencing, understanding deeply the emotions of another person. From a psychological perspective, there are two types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy, which is at an intellectual level, understanding what someone else is going through. And then there's emotional empathy, which is actually feeling what the other person is feeling. These are really important developmental skills, and they're often one of the best ways for us to develop connection and for us to decide to act on someone else's behalf. But sometimes that's too much. The understanding is too much, and it causes us actually to act against someone's interest. Compassion, on the other hand, I like to think of as empathy plus action. And that's really what we're going for. In fact, an early, one of the titles that Kim considered for the book was Compassionate Candor. But she was actually talked out of calling it Compassionate Candor because of the optics of a woman writing a business book and calling it Compassionate Candor, how Radical Candor actually helped to dispel some of the mythology that this was just about sort of doing the right thing and not about getting results. But really at its core, that's what Radical Candor is all about. Care personally and challenge directly. That the combination of those things is really about compassionately acting on someone else's behalf. Okay, so why does this matter? It matters because something that we know is that great teams are built on a culture of honest and open communication. This is correlative, not causative, meaning that it's very hard to run an experiment and prove that high quality feedback leads to better performance. But it is really easy to see that the highest performing teams have in common a culture of honest, direct, and caring feedback. And the reason why that matters for us is that it can both be a tool of improving relationships as well as a sign of improving relationships, so we start to see these conversations happening more frequently with a higher degree of quality. So that's what radical candor is, and I want to give you a quick, very brief overview of how we think about rolling this out, because I think when most people think of radical candor, they think of a boss giving feedback to an employee. But that is in fact not the place that we encourage most people to start. We encourage most people to think about this framework as sort of a compass that can guide behavior. But when we actually work with them on behavior change, we often encourage them to realize that cultures of radical candor start with a willingness to solicit feedback, especially leaders soliciting feedback from their team members. And so we think about how to, and through our live training experience, actually give people very concrete guidance as to exactly how to do this, which boils down to some very simple things, which are learn how to ask some better questions. We often, when we're soliciting feedback, we'll often say something like, do you have any feedback for me? And we've all had the experience of just the crickets start to chirp after we ask a question like that. So we need to learn to ask some better questions. And then we need to learn to listen and respond effectively. And I think one of the best things that leaders can do with the feedback that they're receiving is actually talk about it. Be public about what it is that you've heard and what you are doing to change it. Next, we do need to learn how to give feedback better. And essentially, I think this means learning to hold in our minds the care personally and challenge directly at the same time. And often that boils down to just being clear about our intention and being willing to see and hear the other person's reaction to what we are saying, and being willing to adjust our approach. Importantly, we train people not only on giving criticism, but also on giving praise, because unfortunately, even though we know from a developmental perspective that praise is actually far more important than criticism in terms of improving overall performance, when we've surveyed the companies that we work with, we find that the ratio of praise to criticism is often one or less, meaning they're often happening about the same amount, which is a pretty good outcome for most of the organizations that we work with, or criticism is happening far more often than praise. And that, the effect that has on organizations is that we're sort of the way I think about it is praise is sort of like your accelerator and criticism is your brake. And we have a bunch of people running around hitting the brake all the time, and very few people finding and identifying and helping people invest in the energy of what is actually working, of what is producing success. And so we recommend a really balanced approach to both of those things. In fact, we recommend that if things are going well, that your ratio of praise to criticism should be greater than 1. And I saw, Marty, I see your comment there, and we totally agree. I think one of the reasons why praise sort of gets short shrift in the world of feedback is that we think that praise and recognition are equivalent. And I think that great work, or we really value what you did, that's recognition. But praise and criticism should have the same exact structure from our perspective. It should include some amount of context, an observation of what happened, and the results or impact of what that was, and of that behavior. The structure is exactly the same. If you can't structure your praise in that same way, where you're offering a context, some kind of observation and a result, you haven't thought about why that action that that person took is developmentally valuable. So we encourage people to actually spend the same amount of time sort of preparing their praise and their criticism. And, you know, sometimes it feels good to hear that was a good job that you did, but I would argue that that doesn't help me do a good job again next time. And then finally, we think it's really important that people learn to gauge other people's reactions. Like if we're going to treat this, to invest in this relationship, it's actually really important that we pay attention not just to what we're saying, but also to what the other person is saying in response to it. This should be a dialogue, not a diatribe. And so gauging is all about understanding that how someone receives our feedback is more important than how we intended it. And the reason why is if our goal is to be helpful, we need to be aware of how the other person is reacting. Our goal is not to control it, but is to be aware of that reaction, being willing to adjust our approach in order to make our perspective sharing, in this case, as optimally useful to the other person as possible. So if someone is getting really angry or really upset, instead of us getting really angry or upset in response, and instead of us having a symmetrical response, we want to focus on de-escalating the emotion in that situation, not by ignoring it, but by actually paying attention to it, to accepting what is happening and to trying to find a way to be helpful. And if we're getting the brush off as someone who's ignoring us, we also need to be willing to push a little bit harder, to dig into why they might be feeling resistant to that. And all of these things, the way that we think about it is through inquiry. So as opposed to like us noticing someone's reaction, the whole idea is, and then making statements to try to fix their reaction. The whole idea is like when we notice a reaction that where we're not getting sort of curiosity, interest, and a good conversation, our goal should be to get curious as opposed to getting annoyed, or the cute way to say it is get curious instead of getting furious. So all of this in a live training session, like the way that we design these is like highly experiential learning, because one, we need to understand the relevance to us. In order to start the behavior change process, it needs to feel personally relevant to us. And so there's the experience of reflecting on our own behavior and the implications of that. And then there's the experience, the practice that needs to come with learning some new skills. And what we've realized is that a live training experience, as great as we can make it, it's totally insufficient. I mean, this is not news to people like you all on this call. Live training is really, we think of it as a catalyst for behavior change. We do not think of it as the source of behavior change. And instead, what we have worked with organizations on are ways of creating opportunities to practice on an ongoing basis. And that's how we wound up getting introduced to Mursion. And one of the things that we were trying to solve is this idea of soft skills, in quotes, Brentt, I like your human skills practice. It's really hard to do this well. It takes a skilled facilitator to create a container that feels safe enough for people to actually invest emotionally in this kind of practice. And so the question that we had was like, okay, how do we recreate that once the training is over? How do we give people the opportunity to continue to practice? Now, in some cases, organizations are paying for coaches for people, so they actually are having ongoing conversations. But in a lot of places, that's impractical, especially if you want to do it at scale. The comment before about the over-focusing on giving leaders or managers an opportunity to practice while ignoring giving individual contributors, team members, the opportunity to practice, that's one of the things that excites us about working with Mursion. So we had these questions about how do we make it safe, right? How do we make it realistic enough to be helpful? Because like one of the things we hear all the time is that people are just tired of the scenario, the random scenario driven thing. And they don't feel, in large part because they don't feel like the person who is playing the other side is skilled enough to actually respond in a way that feels natural and realistic. And then last but not least, how do we make this accessible and timely so that you can actually practice it when it feels most relevant? Because most of the individuals who go through training are not deciding when that training happens. And so they may or may not have an instance where they need to practice these skills for a long time, where it would be optimally useful. And so the idea of working with Mursion is about extending the sort of reach of this, both in terms of number of people that can get this kind of practice, as well as the time in which people can practice. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brentt to actually give us a quick demo.
Thanks, Jason. That was just terrific. As always, it's just so delightful to hear you talk about giving feedback, and I always take something new away from the presentation. So we're really excited. This is a simulation that we have created with Radical Candor, that really applying the strategies of caring deeply and being candid with people, and sort of challenging directly into a simulation scenario. So, today we're gonna put ourselves into it. I think I am actually going to do the simulation. So unless there's a volunteer who would like to do to be put into the hot seat and to become a panelist and to practice Radical Candor with an avatar. So I'm just gonna poll the audience really quick. If anyone would like to go, we'd love to give you a chance to do it. Otherwise, I know it can be challenging. Priscilla would like to do it? Okay, great. We got a volunteer. So Priscilla, we were happy to have you come and do this. We're going to turn you over to Bennett. Bennett is our host avatar, and Bennett is going to walk you through what you're going to do today. But basically, you're going to be using Radical Candor to give feedback to a colleague of yours who struggled in a recent presentation. So, Jamie, I think you need to make Priscilla a panelist so that she can do this.
Making sure that I'm grabbing the right one. And yes, Priscilla has been a great asset to our roundtables coming in, and she should be over as a panelist now. So Priscilla, if you want to go ahead and turn on your camera and audio so that we can make certain that Bennett can see and hear you.
Right, I have.
Perfect. Lovely to see you again, my friend. And Priscilla has joined a couple of roundtables, and always happy to have you. So it's great to have a volunteer. I always love it when we let one of our attendees jump on and actually do the simulation. So this is something brand new. I know Priscilla has not seen this at all, so this will be a brand new experience for you. And we're excited to let you go through this and let our fellow attendees see how it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'll have Brent do the same so that everybody just sees Priscilla and Bennett. Hi, Bennett. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself, Jamie?
I am doing well. Bennett, Priscilla has volunteered to do our Radical Candor simulation today, so I'm going to leave her in your very capable hands. Thank you.
Great. So welcome, Priscilla. Thank you so much for doing the simulation today. As Jamie said, my name is Bennett. I'm your host avatar. I'm going to make sure that you have everything you need, okay?
All right, Bennett. Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, it's so great you're here. And just confirming you can see and hear me okay.
I can see you and I can hear you.
Perfect. So, Priscilla, I'm going to share a slide with you. I'll read it out loud and see if you have any questions, okay?
Please, thank you.
Great. So you're going to be talking to Linda. She gave her first presentation a few days ago to senior colleagues. You, her boss, noticed they were looking at their phones. While Linda's presentation had strong content, her delivery was disorganized. You're having your weekly one-on-one meeting with her, and you'll be practicing Radical Candor, caring personally while challenging directly to set her up for success for her next presentation in 2 weeks. The desired outcome is motivate Linda to embrace the opportunity to improve, agree on concrete next steps towards course correction. You can use the principles of Radical Candor. Listen with the intent to understand, not just to respond. Commit to being kind, clear, specific, and sincere. Be humble and state your intention to be helpful. Be present for emotional reactions, but don't try to control them. I see you're writing that down, so just let me know when you're done with the slide.
And I am just going to step in real quick to remind everybody that at the very top of your screen, it says View Options. And under View Options, if you drop down and go to Side-by-Side mode, make sure you're in that side-by-side mode so that you can see Bennett as well as Priscilla as they're having that interaction.
Great. So Priscilla, are you finished almost? Just let me
Yes,
know when
sir,
you're done.
I am. We can go. This is definitely a challenge, but I look forward to embracing it.
Got your back, Priscilla.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so Priscilla as well, I'm here. So if you want to say pause and ask for assistance, or we can see about going to the reflection piece as a group, or you can just say pause to end it. Okay?
All right, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Priscilla. Have fun.
All right, thanks, Bennett.
Hi, Priscilla.
Hello there. Good to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you too.
Well, tell me, how do you feel that the presentation went?
Well, great. I'm happy to get right into it. So I'm pretty pleased with how it went. I thought it went well. Yeah, I'm pretty excited overall about how it went.
What do you feel are some of the takeaways that you felt about the presentation?
Well, you know, there's a couple of things. You know, one thing is I would have liked to have had more time to prepare. I only had 3 days. And so, you know, that would have been nice to have had a little bit more time. And then, well, I guess, you know, I noticed that people were on their phones at some points, and that was hard for me. It made me a little bit nervous, and I'm still new here, so I wasn't sure if that's part of the company culture, but that was a little bit of a struggle.
Okay, if I could just jump right in, because I'm hearing you say, and I'm taking notes, so I hope you don't mind. I'm taking notes. I want to make sure that I get down how you felt about the presentation. Right off the bat, you did mention that there were 3 days, and you felt that you could have had more time. So I apologize for that. I take ownership for that. So tell me, what is it about the 3-day time span that you felt that maybe if you had had more time, or maybe I wasn't clear in my directions with you? So give me some feedback on that.
Well, sure. So I think it was out of both of our hands, Priscilla. It just turned out that it was a quick turnaround. It was a high stakes presentation. You know, it was for senior leaders. I thought my content was really strong and my delivery was pretty good. Again, I think that sometimes, you know, ideally we'd have more time, but yeah, we just didn't. It just turned out to have that quick turnaround. I have 2 weeks before my next presentation, so that won't exactly happen again.
Okay, well, in this time between now and then, hopefully any questions you have that we can meet and further discuss that. One thing I will note, because you did say that you noticed that phones. So perhaps within your structure, how do you feel about that? Let's address that.
So I'm sorry, you had a little bit of a glitch there, a Zoom glitch. So I apologize. I missed your question. Could you repeat it?
Between now and the 3 weeks when you give your next presentation, we'll address some issues that you feel particularly concerned about. So going back.
Okay, but issues. Wait a minute. I mean, I thought it went pretty well. Are you saying that it didn't go very well, Priscilla? There were issues with my presentation?
No, I'm responding to the comment you made about you have several weeks before the next one. So if you feel that there's something I can help you with, I'm offering my help to help make sure that it was clear of what your anticipation would be and what the expectations are of the audience. Does that help?
I guess, I mean, I have another presentation in a couple of weeks, and I'm wondering if you're thinking that I'm just not ready to present to them.
No, I don't say or think that at all, because what you're seeing, what you saw, the fact that there were some individuals that were looking at phones, I wondered what kind of questions that you had as a result of that regarding perhaps what you felt that the audience needed. And maybe I could give you some insight. Maybe someone said something to me that I could have passed on to you to help you in preparation. So between now and when your next presentation is, perhaps we could get together and I can give you whatever feedback I've gotten. And if you've gotten feedback from different individuals, then we could talk about that and see how we could better accustom it to the audience as a whole. Because I know in that audience, even though some of them, most of all of them were senior leaders, they're from different backgrounds. So I just want to make sure you feel comfortable in what you have to address and what they may be expecting.
Right. Well, thank you for that context, Priscilla. I mean, I know that part of it is that I was nervous, especially when people got on their phones. I started talking more quickly. I also rushed through everything, and I didn't check for understanding. That's something that I like to try to do, but I think I just got rattled when people are on their phones. So there are ways that I really want to make sure that I improve, and I would be interested, if you're open to it, to circling back with you and just connecting around ways that I could help make it be more dynamic and interesting, and maybe just check for understanding, finding even places to put in the slides like stop, ask questions, that kind of thing.
I love that. That's a good point you bring up, because if we engage them more going forward, then we'll have more presentations to follow up on some questions that, granted, we can't cover everything in the short amount of time that you have to present. So we do want everybody to feel comfortable that this is what we are addressing, but at the same time, this is what we hear you're saying. So we do have another presentation where we can address those additional questions more fully.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Well, that sounds good to me. I really appreciate it, Priscilla. That wasn't easy to hear, that maybe it wasn't. I mean, I really thought it went well, but I see the points that you're making, and I'd like to go do some work on my presentation and then follow up with you.
I think it was awesome. And I think that together we can hit some of those points that you said you had to rush through. So maybe we can break them out and we can address them more fully in future presentations. But overall, it was absolutely awesome. And I do want you to hear that from me, that I really did enjoy it. And I'm sure others did too. Because for all we know, what they were texting about was, or even whatever they were doing on the phones, they were relaying that message to others. And we do need to kind of talk with them and let them know that during the presentation, phones are not allowed.
Okay, that would be really great. Well, thank you, Priscilla. I really appreciate it.
You are so welcome. All right, I'm back to Bennett.
Bennett, I think we're going to turn things over to Jason to kind of debrief with Priscilla and just talk about the observations. So thank you so much, Bennett. Linda, that was terrific.
Thank
Priscilla,
you. Thanks, Priscilla.
What was that like for you? It's a tough scenario.
It is. Putting someone on the hot seat is a tough scenario, and that's what I really like about Mursion. And it was mentioned, and Jason mentioned it, I believe, the fact that this is a safe ground to practice. You just don't expect going over material and then to walk away and be able to regurgitate it when an opportunity comes up if you have not rehearsed. And it's important that this is an ongoing matter that is constantly addressed, so that when we do have those difficult conversations, that we can be more comfortable in having a communication that is more fluid.
Absolutely. I thought you did a wonderful job of including her perspective at the beginning. One of the there's research that shows that there's a strong correlation between people who ask for perspective before sharing their own are perceived as being clearer and more kind than people who simply share their perspective. So that was really great. I'm curious, like what your reaction to the moment where you sort of you said that there might have been some issues, and then you had Linda gave you a kind of strong sort of fear or like uncertainty reaction?
Well, when she made that comment, I felt like maybe Linda either A, did not hear me, or she was being sensitive, because this was, as she said, more like a rush presentation on her behalf. That's what she felt. 3 days was rushing it. She didn't really know and didn't understand perhaps the audience and what information overload would be too much for that level of audience. So at the same time, I think we were both put into each other's space really quickly. I didn't want to offend her. She felt like she was being offended. So I just wanted to clarify that what I'm hearing was frustration on her part, but what I heard in her delivery was good. Perhaps going forward, now that she's expressing that frustration to me, that we can help her to help deliver a better, even better presentation.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's a lot. You offered Linda lots of opportunity for self-reflection, which is also really good, because often we don't have to go deep on our observations. Often, like I think being gentle in the sense of, you can always be more direct, right? But it's often hard to walk it back. So like, yes, if you're super direct, it can be really challenging to walk back. And so the idea, what I saw you do that I thought was really great, was you would share an observation or reflect what you heard, and then you would ask Linda to to process again, right? To say like, okay, so this is what I heard. This is what I feel about that. What do you think about that? And that loop, I think, is really, really powerful. So that was I think what I saw that was strongest in what you did. So I just wanted to share that that with you.
So what areas do you feel that I could improve on? Because I know there's got to be plenty, but as it is with the simulation, the only way we can learn is by getting good feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the one thing that I would be curious about, I don't actually know, is whether you had this data at the beginning that the delivery was sort of disorganized. And I wonder if Linda after your conversation, if Linda has an understanding of that, like, affecting the way that people were receiving it, or that you had the perspective, at least, that was affecting the way that people were receiving it. I think we got to this, like, it was rushed, and maybe there's a way to expand. But I also think, like, in terms of the scenario, there's a question in my mind about how clear it was that it's not just that it was rushed, it was that there was also disorganization there. So I don't know, but that would be the question that I would ask of Linda.
I was trying to lead around that without being too direct, as we mentioned earlier about the statement of how direct can you be without it being offensive. So by mentioning the fact that it was rushed and mentioning the fact that there were different levels of management in the audience, their level of expectations versus what she was able to deliver, and perhaps there are certain points that we can take as a takeaway, whether it was direct feedback or perhaps the part of her presentation where she noticed it seemed like there were too many that were looking at their phones. Well, were they passing off the information, or this is something that really they weren't sure how to take? So if we could take those snippets and better develop them in the next presentation, and how we can sparse it out in presentations to come. So you see, I was trying to indirectly come back around to the fact that, yes, it was somewhat disorganized, and how do you feel about honing in on certain pieces? Because sometimes you can put too much, compact too much into the brief amount of time she had to share, and then it's not as meaningful.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. You did such a great job, Priscilla. Thank you so much. Always a joy. We've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and, Priscilla, I'm going to put you back over to attendees so that you have the ability to use that chat function to keep on with the conversation. And we so appreciate you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Priscilla.
I just want to go ahead and turn things back over. I know we had a couple of questions about the avatars and the use of avatars. And I know one of the things we didn't really address is that Bennett, or whoever that host avatar is, also is a part of that reflection process. But in the spirit of the roundtable, we turned it over to Jason. And I know Brent had a couple things to address, so I'm going to let you take these last few minutes for that.
Yeah, I'm going to take 1 minute. Ted posed a really good question. I can't remember now if it was to the panelists or to everyone, which was, okay, well, if you have a human immersion, there was a live trainer who played both Bennett, and the same trainer played Bennett and Linda, and could do a situation where there were multiple avatars in the scenario. You know, why not just use the human? And the reason is that research shows that when you use an avatar, it communicates to the learner, this is, you got us, this isn't real, this is in fact a simulation, and we want you to try new things, and we want you to be okay with making some mistakes as you try new things. So the avatar actually gives them a little bit more safety in practicing new skills, because they know they can't hurt the avatar can't hurt them, and we're real clear that there is a human behind it, but it creates this level of anonymity for the learner to feel like if they make a mistake, it's okay. Now, usually we don't do it like Priscilla did it, where it's, 68 people that she doesn't know that she has to go. You do this in a private setting. You feel less judged by an avatar, and that allows you to really focus on the strategies at hand, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I don't want to screw up in front of my peer or something like that. And the avatar, it's a weird sort of, it seems counterintuitive, but when you actually use an avatar and you say, yes, you're right, this isn't real, this is a simulation, people actually treat it as it is more real, because they're like, okay, it's not a game, but it is gamified in some way where it really presents a challenge that they want to win, and they just feel more natural getting into it. Now, I will say, most people find it a little bit disarming to talk to an avatar for about 30 to 45 seconds, but after you get over that hump, they just stay much more engaged and immersed in the conversation. And in comparison to kind of more traditional types of role play, they take it more seriously. They don't break character. They don't hop out and say like,
right,
oh, I would never do this, but
Yep.
the context calls for this. So yeah, and then just on it also allows our humans, our actors, to play all sorts of different types of characters to allow for all different types of conversations, and allows for us to, in training, imagine we were doing 4 different radical candor scenarios. We could change up who you're talking to each time very easily.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I didn't take 1 minute to answer that question. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You were fabulous. It is the top of the hour.
Oh,
To everybody
okay.
who has to drop, I want to say thank you so much. Jason, I don't know if you have 3 minutes. There was one more question. If you want to take it real quick, I'll keep the recording going, and we'll
Sure,
follow
I
up
can
with
do that.
everybody with that, in case anybody has to hop off. But I thought it was a great question. It says, can you speak to how silence plays into radical candor? As a follow-up, I find myself talking too much and not letting the other person speak more. And I'm in the same boat with you.
Yes. I will say that silence in conversations is very uncomfortable. Human beings will do whatever they can to not be uncomfortable. And so I think the act of not speaking is incredibly powerful, especially if you have more power in that situation. And power can be mediated by lots of things, right? There's like organizational or institutional power, like if you're the boss, but there may also be other kinds of power. Like maybe there's a gender imbalance in your workplace and you're the overrepresented gender and they're the underrepresented gender, or there may be, it can also be race or ethnicity. Like when someone is underrepresented or feels disempowered, giving them space to speak without inserting yourself, I think is an act of kindness, is an act of love, is one of the best things that human beings can do for each other. And I think that often we're motivated to speak. This is a good example of ruinous empathy, because we feel like the discomfort of the silence is more painful than the discomfort of whatever it is that's taking them a minute to figure out how they want to respond. But usually it's not the case. Usually the silence is actually less of an issue, less of a cause of long-term discomfort than whatever it is that it's taking them a moment to process and figure out how to say. And so honoring that, I think, is really, really valuable. So if people with power could speak less and listen more, I think the world would just be a better place, like hands down. So there's that. I will also say that if you read enough business books, especially like when you get into sales and like neurolinguistic programming and stuff, there's also ways to weaponize silence to like make people more uncomfortable. And that's not what we're trying to do. So I just want to call out that like how we are quiet makes a big difference. So like if we're quiet and sort of like checked out or disinterested, that sends a very different message than if we're leaning forward and actually looking at what the other person is doing, showing genuine interest in our expression. That is a very different kind of quiet than leaning back, looking out the window, or playing with your phone and not saying anything. Very, very valuable and can be a gift. And I just want to encourage us to use it in the right way.
I want to just piggyback on that. We work with one of the large consulting firms, and they've done some research around feedback. And I want to talk about silence on the other side, because it relates to the power dynamic that Jason was talking about. Is that research suggests that underrepresented groups, especially in fact women, a lot of times where they're underrepresented, are not given the candor and feedback that they need to grow as professionals. So it's not a silence thing, but often they're treated with sort of kid gloves instead of being challenged directly. And this has been a major impediment to people's growth and development. So having a framework like Radical Candor that gives leaders the tools to have these difficult conversations is really important. But you also have to do some work on the mindset around unconscious bias and how we interact and how our feedback differs depending on who we're giving the feedback to.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you saying that. Like, I think I took it in the context of like within a feedback conversation, but you are absolutely right. And it's something that we run into all the time. It is that Radical Candor is applied differently and experienced differently depending on many identity factors, race, gender, ethnicity, culture of origin, etc. And so being aware that our goal is to be kind and clear does not mean there's a one-size-fits-all approach. But if we can bring that intention to all the things that we do, and we'd be willing to adjust our approach for that to land for the other person as kind and clear, to be aware of like how we can get to the point where they are receiving it as kind and clear, I think like that's the gold standard. It's sort of the platinum rule, right? Like treat others how they would like to be treated. Is really what we're going for with Radical Candor. And just because, for example, there is a gendered idea that women are needed to be treated with more care, that doesn't mean that's how they actually would like to be treated. In fact, Kim, if you tried to be indirect with Kim, she would be furious at you. So I think recognizing that is super important.
Well, we've gone over, and we just want to thank everybody, and especially Priscilla, for being brave and getting up there and trying what may have been a new framework for her and how to give feedback. And that's a sort of spirit of these roundtables. We really appreciate it. We've got a lot more of them coming, and I'm sure Jamie will send you information about that. But I want to thank also Jason for joining us today. Brilliant as always, and we just truly appreciate this partnership, and we're really excited about it. So we have a package of Mursion simulations with Radical Candor content. We'll follow up with that information on that. We're excited to explore that for anyone who wants to dig in deeper. So thank you so much, and Jamie, let you kind of close
Yep,
it out
great.
here.
No, you said it all. I'm gonna yes and the thanks and praise for Priscilla and for Jason. Thank you again for being here. I will be sending out the recording as well as the slide deck. Slide deck will give you some basic pricing on that package that we have with Radical Candor and Mursion, and it will have all of the contact information for all of us so that you can reach out, and we would love to continue the conversation. To all of you, thank you for hanging in there. We appreciate it. Have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.